North America's Great Lakes are some of the greatest lakes in the world, but they aren't the only lakes in North America that are great. The ice sheets that carved the Great Lakes system also left behind many other large lakes as they melted, and those lakes span a massive portion of the continent. Many of you left comments on my last video about the Great Lakes asking to hear about these other lakes. So, together, we'll take a look at these lakes, which are pretty great, even if they aren't Great Lakes. Strap in because there's a lot of lakes to cover. Let's explore. Because there are so many lakes in North America, it's important to set some criteria. For this video, we'll cover every lake on the continent with an area of at least 1,000 square miles, or 2,590 square kilometers, as well as a few smaller lakes that might be interesting. If you'd rather your round number cutoff not be in freedom units, you can set it at 2,500 square kilometers and also include the LG3 reservoir in Quebec. Also, we covered the Great Lakes watershed in the previous video, so we won't go into detail here about Lakes Superior, Huron, Michigan, Erie, Ontario, or Nipigon, even though they all fit the size cutoff. We're going to start by following the arc of lakes that stretches northwest from Lake Superior. These lakes follow the edge of the exposed portion of a massive ancient rock formation called the Canadian Shield. The Canadian Shield as a whole is well over 1 billion years old, and portions date back more than 4.25 billion years, more than 90% of the age of the Earth itself. This ancient rock was scoured by the Laurentide ice sheet during the last glacial maximum. When the ice sheet began its slow retreat around 20,000 years ago, it left behind large dimples in the rocky surface below, creating what is formally known as a deranged drainage pattern, with lakes and rivers flowing in all directions. This process created most of the lakes in this video. The first lakes we encounter past the Great Lakes are the remnants of glacial Lake Agassiz. We first hit Rainy Lake at 360 square miles, or 932 square kilometers, which drains by the Rainy River into Lake of the Woods. With an area of 1,679 square miles, or 4,350 square kilometers, Lake of the Woods is the 6th largest lake at least partly in U.S. territory, after the 5 major Great Lakes. The northwesternmost point of Lake of the Woods forms the tri-point between the state of Minnesota and the provinces of Ontario and Manitoba. Finding exactly which point on the lake this was caused major headaches for the surveyors of the U.S.-Canada border in the 1820s. The eventually agreed-upon border cuts off a peninsula known as the Northwest Angle, the only part of the continental U.S. above the 49th parallel north, and the residents of which can only access the rest of U.S. territory via Canada or by boat. Continuing downstream, the Winnipeg River flows northwest from Lake of the Woods into Lake Winnipeg, meaning muddy waters in Cree. With a surface area of 9,465 square miles, or 24,514 square kilometers, Lake Winnipeg is the 12th largest lake on the planet, the 6th largest in Canada right above Lake Ontario, and the 3rd largest entirely in Canada. Lake Winnipeg is very shallow for such a big lake, with an average depth of only 39 feet or 12 meters. Several adjacent large lakes drain into Lake Winnipeg, including Cedar Lake, Lake Manitoba, and Lake Winnipegosis, as well as more distant lakes such as Red Lake in Minnesota. Lake Winnipegosis is the largest of those, with an area of 2,070 square miles, or 5,370 square kilometers, and the name of which means Little Muddy Waters. Lake Manitoba has an area of 1,785 square miles, or 4,624 square kilometers, and Cedar Lake only 522 square miles, or 1,353 square kilometers. Lake Winnipeg drains into Hudson Bay via the Nelson River, carrying water from 4 U.S. states and 4 Canadian provinces, including 3 of Canada's 6 largest cities. One unique lake in the Nelson River Basin is Lake Diefenbaker, an artificial reservoir formed by the Gardiner and Qu'Appelle River dams, with an area of 170 square miles or 430 square kilometers. Named for Canada's 13th Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, water from the reservoir reaches Lake Winnipeg by 2 separate paths, to the north by the Saskatchewan River, and to the south by the Qu'Appelle and Assiniboine rivers. This makes Lake Diefenbaker a so-called bifurcation lake, a term for lakes that have 2 different outflows, which are pretty rare globally. But Lake Diefenbaker is not the only large bifurcation lake in Saskatchewan. Leaving behind the basin of Lake Agassiz, we find Wollaston Lake, the world's largest bifurcation lake, with an area of 1,035 square miles, or 2,681 square kilometers. Most of the lake's water flows out the Cochrane River into Reindeer Lake, but 10% or so drains through the Fond du Lac River into Lake Athabasca. Reindeer Lake is the world's 21st largest lake, with an area of 2,570 square miles, or 6,650 square kilometers, which itself eventually drains via the Churchill River into Hudson Bay, although most of the actual flow of the Churchill is diverted into the Nelson to supply hydroelectric power. The deepest part of Reindeer Lake is actually an impact crater, dating back around 99 million years. Lake Athabasca is the world's 20th largest lake, with an area of 3,030 square miles, or 7,850 square kilometers, and is home to a very large field of sand dunes on its southern shore. The waters of Lake Athabasca eventually make their way to the Mackenzie River, which flows into the Arctic. The Mackenzie River drainage basin is the second largest on the continent, after the Mississippi's, and contains two lakes even larger than Lake Athabasca. The more southerly of the two is Great Slave Lake, the world's 10th largest lake, with an area of 10,500 square miles, or 27,200 square kilometers. The capital of the Northwest Territories, Yellowknife, is on the lake's northern shore. The name of the lake has a bit of a story, which does indeed involve some slavery. One of the local First Nations calls themselves Dene, meaning people, but to distinguish them from all the other Athabascan-speaking groups that also call themselves Dene, they are sometimes called Deh Cho Dene, meaning Big River people, because they live near the Mackenzie River, which they call Tetsö. Now, their neighbors to the south, the Cree, had at some point in the past captured several Deh Cho Dene as slaves. So, when the French traders asked the Cree about the inhabitants of the area around the lake, the Cree referred to them by a name that was translated into French as esclave, and then into English as slave or slavey. That's where the English name of the lake comes from. Several Deh Cho Dene and others are understandably unhappy about the lake's current name, and are seeking to have it changed to one of its indigenous names, like Tetsö. The more northerly lake in the Mackenzie Basin is Great Bear Lake, which is the largest lake entirely within Canada, and the 9th largest lake in the world, with an area of 12,028 square miles, or 31,153 square kilometers. The lake lies directly on the Arctic Circle, and hosts only a single community, Dëne Sųłıné, with 573 people. Great Bear Lake, Great Slave Lake, and Lake Athabasca are all remnants of the prehistoric Lake McConnell, which at times flowed into Lake Agassiz, and at times directly into the Arctic Ocean. Since we've now hit the Arctic Ocean, we're leaving our arc of lakes behind. There are 3 more Canadian glacial lakes to cover. One is Dubont Lake, on the border of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, with an area of 1,480 square miles, or 3,833 square kilometers. The other 2 are on Baffin Island, Netchling Lake, the largest lake on any island in the world, with an area of 2,140 square miles, or 5,542 square kilometers, and Amajuak Lake, at 1,203 square miles, or 3,115 square kilometers. Elsewhere in Canada, there's Lake Melville in Labrador with an area of 1,185 square miles, or 3,069 square kilometers, which is actually a tidal estuary, but all the sources still seem to call it a lake despite that. Rounding out the Canadian portion of the list are some very large artificial reservoirs. Smallwood Reservoir at 2,520 square miles, or 6,527 square kilometers, Kanapisco Reservoir at 1,667 square miles, or 4,318 square kilometers, and Robert Bourassa Reservoir at 1,095 square miles, or 2,835 square kilometers. I'll also mention the Manicouagan Reservoir, a lake in an impact crater which would have made the cutoff if it didn't have a giant island in the middle. Canada dominates the continent's list of lakes with its vast size and glacier-carved landscape. Outside Canada, there are 3 more large lakes. Iliamna Lake in Alaska just squeaks on the list at 1,012.5 square miles, or 2,622 square kilometers. The Great Salt Lake in the deserts of Utah is usually above 1,000 square miles, but fell to a record low of 950 square miles, or 2,460 square kilometers in 2021. And finally, all the way in Central America is Lake Nicaragua, in the country of Nicaragua, at 3,191 square miles, or 8,264 square kilometers. So North America has no lack of large lakes, And while some might not be quite as impressive as the Great Lakes, they're certainly all pretty great themselves. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more like this, and as always, thanks for watching.